All right, well, let's talk today. I'm super excited about this one, actually. Metabolic flexibility. So let me see if we can get the screen shared here, because it really is the underpinning for so much of what we do in program, but also so much of, I think, the misunderstanding about where diabetes comes from and insulin resistance and all these things. Excited to talk about that today. So, metabolic flexibility, the key to long-term health and longevity, so important to everything we do, and probably something you've never heard of before from a conventional doc. Ken probably knows, but generally not something that we talk about in clinic. So, what we'll talk about today, what is metabolic flexibility? Give you a definition. Talk about AMP-K, which is that body's main energy switch, and becomes so important as we talk about improving our health, fat oxidation, and kind of all the things. It's a really good big tie, and I talk about it a lot in the program when we're talking about why things work, and we're really kind of leveraging, optimizing this AMP-K switch to promote fat oxidation, meaning using fat as fuel as opposed to carbohydrates, and the diet that we're eating is optimized for that as well. Signs of metabolic insufficiency, and that's really inflexibility, I should say, and how to improve on your metabolic flexibility. So the first thing, why does metabolic flexibility matter? Well, normal energy metabolism is characterized by shifts in glucose and fat as fuel for mitochondria, right? That's what's happening in a normal human system where there are times of feast and times of famine, and your body has to use different sources of fuel. So during the daytime, when you're eating, you've got ample supply of carbohydrate. That's ultimately glucose. And then at nighttime, when you're not eating, or in the plains of the yesteryear, food wasn't plentiful, then you dipped in your fat stores, right? Remember, what is fat? Well, it's an energy source. It is the fuel tank, so to speak, right? So normal metabolism should allow you to bounce back and forth. But in this world that we currently live in of being overfed but undernourished, we are constantly being bathed in these highly processed carbohydrates to the point that our bodies, our mitochondria, our cells become less able to switch between back and forth. So now you're not ping-ponging because honestly, your body is never put in a position where it needs to use anything but these high processed foods that just get in your system, dump in your system. So for those of you who are out there that feel tired, feel sleepy after you eat a dessert or a bowl of ice cream or sugary meal, that's kind of what's happening is you're dumping all this processed glucose in your body. Is like, what is going on? It devotes a lot of energy to try to process this, and we become over time less and less able to use fat as fuel. And a lot of the obesity related cardiometabolic diseases are now recognized as disorders of metabolic flexibility. And so inside of Well 12, as you know, a lot of what I'm doing is trying to shift kind of away from insulin resistance, and we've had great success getting people off of medications. But really, what all I'm doing is restoring the natural balance, right? All we're doing is natural balance. And so, as I mentioned here, this nutrient overload over here leads to mitochondrial indecision. They can't figure out where to go, and then it gets stuck in this analysis paralysis mode, and then just stops working. And that's really kind of the scary underpinning. There's a really fun article that I read called "Mitochondrial Indecision." That's where that line came from, and it just basically says we confuse our bodies so much that it doesn't know what to do with anything, and therefore just kind of shuts down. Right. So as we talked about, what is metabolic flexibility? Well, it's this ability to ping pong between using glucose, which is the building block of a carbohydrate, and fat as fuel. So this ability to switch efficiently between fats and carbohydrates for energy. And really, just like if you have like a hybrid car, like my wife has a plug-in hybrid car, right? Sometimes it uses electricity, sometimes it uses gas, right? That's kind of how these motors run. But ultimately, the idea with that is you should have a consistent driving experience, right? You shouldn't know when it's running on electric. We shouldn't know when it's running on gas. It just moves. That's all you care about with the car, right? But that doesn't really happen in our body because when we lose this ability to bounce back and forth, then you get all sorts of energy crashes and weight gain and insulin resistance, as we'll talk about. So we really want to deliver this back to our body, and the way that we do that is with a lot of diet and lifestyle options, which are what's baked into the program. So why does it matter? Well, as I mentioned, prevents energy crashes and supports endurance. enhances the use of fat as fuel. So when I talk about oxidation, sometimes I'll use that word. That means using fat as fuel and weight. So enhances using fat as fuel as well as weight management, because now you're not just adding to your fuel tank, you're actually using the fuel in the tank, right? Reduces inflammation, lowers disease risk of cardiometabolic issues and vascular issues, optimizes brain function, and supports longevity. So now the mitochondria in your brain are able to flip between fat and glucose much more efficiently. So your brain doesn't get into those brain fog modes, right? The brain and the heart actually use fatty acids a little bit more efficiently than we use glucose as fuel. So it becomes important for these two vital organs to be able to use fat. We don't want the mitochondria in those cells, in particular those tissues in the brain and in the heart, to lose the ability to switch between back and forth. And so here you can see like a high-fat ketogenic diet, leads to this metabolic influx, and it's not just high fat rather, but kind of the standard American diet. Processed foods leads to this loss of mitochondrial function, metabolic instability, and then this aging phenotype, right? Oh, that's just, you're supposed to forget where your keys are because you're getting older. Well, that's not necessarily the case. And I know that's kind of small, sorry. And then time-controlled fasting, or we call that intermittent fasting, time-restricted eating. So now you're going through periods of low glucose, insulin and growth factors kind of come down, so you get greater mitochondrial efficiency, greater metabolic flexibility. So we really do, at a cellular level, our bodies prefer not eating all the time, right? Imagine if you just inhaled without ever exhaling, right? During our breath work, right? Your lungs would eventually just pop, right? Because you can only blow up a balloon so big, right? So we need to not just fuel our bodies, which is very important, but we also need to use the fuel efficiently. Interestingly, and you'll like this, women are actually better at metabolic flexibility than men. At your hormonal milieu, estrogen promotes fat oxidation and mitochondrial efficiency. Part of this may be related to the hormonal changes of childbirth, and that's why, estrogen really just supports that. But it's really an interesting finding. Women preserve lean muscle mass better during fasting, so men during fasting will tend to lose muscle faster than women do. And female metabolism adapts differently to endurance exercise. Now, a natural question here is then, well, why does it seem easier for men to lose weight than women? Right. So what we're talking about here is just that metabolic flexibility, being able to bounce into using fat for fuel. Men, though, will have a higher circulating level of testosterone, right? So as a result, they're able to put on muscle a little bit more easily and use glucose a little bit more often with that lean muscle mass. So even though women can bounce between metabolic flexibility using fat and glucose kind of back and forth, they can ping pong a little bit easier. It still is easy for guys hormonally to lose weight. So I'm sorry about that. Nothing I can do. I did not design the body. But interestingly, what this means is that for some women, or for most women, I should say, you do not need to intermittent fast as long as men do to get the same metabolic effect. So generally in women, 12 hours of fasting is sufficient. So now if you're trying to lose weight and really kind of get ahead of the game, then longer periods of fasting may be better. But there are some women who experience the same amount of weight loss and metabolic optimization with shorter amounts of fasting. So in program, when I've got someone who really has a hard time with fasting in the morning, and they've given it their go, we will give back a small breakfast, right? So that we're not getting those same crashes, because we know that women adapt differently than men. So that's a good thing. So AMP-K, I mentioned at the top. What is AMP-K? Well, it's a cellular switch essentially that senses energy demand. We haven't talked about this too much, but we've talked about ATP, adenosine triphosphate, as the currency of energy in the body. Adenosine triphosphate, it's an adenosine molecule. This is super nerdy, so sorry, I won't get too into it, but it's an adenosine kind of molecule with three phosphates on it. Right, so you've got one, two, three, and when you break that phosphate bond, that's what releases energy, right? So that's ATP, adenosine triphosphate. When you break off one of the phosphate bonds, it becomes ADP, adenosine diphosphate, and then if you break off two, it becomes AMP, adenosine monophosphate. Right? Sorry, have another cup of coffee. Didn't mean to get so biochemical on you, but what your body does is senses this AMP to ATP ratio, right? So what does that mean? So it's the used up energy molecule relative to the stores of the complete energy molecule, and it uses that ratio. And when it sees that you're using more fuel than you're storing or that you're creating, the body will then switch your your preferred fuel source from glucose over to fat. I hope that makes sense because fat is more readily available. So it's kind of the gatekeeper, if you will, between am I using glucose, am I using fat, am I using glucose, am I using fat? Well, let me see what's going on, right? Just like yesterday when it was raining, is it raining? Let me look outside and see if I need to put my raincoat on or if I can just wear my normal jacket, right? So that's the gatekeeper between how your body will use energy. And so when you are using AMP-K in that way, you're really, turning the needle back and forth, you can actually enhance that mitochondrial efficiency. So you're making your body use fuel more effectively, which is again what we want to do. This is a super nerdy diagram of this, but how can I go a single session without talking about mitochondria and putting up a picture? So you can see here AMPK, and we'll have another even scarier figure here in the next one. But this is AMPK right here in the middle, and then you've got the fatty acid side and the glucose side. But all of those are regulated by AMPK. And when we talk about this AMPK, I mean, these are all the cellular processes that it's involved with, right? So I don't, this is not to overwhelm or, again, there's no test after this, but when we look at all the pathways that AMPK is involved in, it's involved in insulin sensing. It's involved in something called insulin-like growth factor, which is implicated in metabolic disease, but also implicated in cancers, fatty acid metabolism, glucose metabolism, oxygen use, sympathetic nerve your parasympathetic, sympathetic fight or flight system goes up to the brain. Use, leptin, which is, if you remember, one of the hormones of energy balance that helps our body sense fullness or if we need to eat, and they all kind of converge right right here. Where's my right here at AMK, right? So it's amazing to me how one thing that in clinical practice we don't talk about too much, but one kinase, one cellular switch affects all of these downstream things. So what does that mean? Well, it must be really important if a lot of things are depending on it, right? So we really want to optimize how that works. So how do we switch over to AMP-K to be able to use fat metabolism? Again, we are so carbohydrate driven in this overfed, undernourished world of ours with all these highly processed foods. We want to restore that fat metabolism. Right. So how do we do that? Well, prolonged fasting. So 12 to 16 hours. Again, some folks are more easily adaptable. If you've done well 12 several times, your body now has that metabolic flexibility. So you may not need to fast for as long if your body really doesn't crave or doesn't do well with it. But 12 to 16 hours generally, low processed carbohydrate diet. Endurance exercise, actually. So walking for long, this doesn't mean you have to run a marathon, but walking for long periods of time, particularly in that zone two, that low heart rate zone, enhances AMPK function. And cold exposure, at my gym at Lifetime Fitness over here, they now have a cold plunge, which I've yet to try because I've got such PTSD from growing up in Chicago and being cold. But cold exposure will actually help boost mitochondrial function along with calorie restriction. So that's the intermittent fasting stuff that we do. Signs of metabolic flexibility, so frequent hunger and sugar cravings. That means that you're getting those sugar cravings because your body doesn't know how to flip into fat metabolism mode. And I think a lot of times that first week or so of people going on program, that first week or two, it becomes very difficult for them to fast because their bodies have that inflexibility, right? Energy crashes, struggles with weight loss, insulin resistance, metabolic disorders. Those are all signs of poor metabolic flexibility. And you can see here kind of a little bit more high waist to hip ratio. That's actually looking at the visceral fat ratio of your body. Subjective experience, though, this is what most people will feel, that hard to fast, energy dips, I have to take a nap in the afternoon because your body just has no way to go. Bonking without carbs, so people feel like, oh my God, and I get this all the time. I have my body needs carbohydrates. I can't not eat rice or I can't not eat sugar because I need it. Well, that's actually a sign. Hey, Sal, that's actually a sign that your body doesn't know how to flip back and forth, right? So you really need to work on this to get that metabolic flexibility to optimize your metabolic health. How do we improve it, right? Oh my gosh, I'm gonna die. I never mean to scare you guys, but oh my gosh, the world is ending. What do I do? Well, there's a lot of things you can do. Number one, as we've talked about several times here, intermittent fasting, 12 to 16 hours daily, enhances fat adaptation. Reduce processed foods and refined carbs. Remember, that's the fuel, the refined carbs and processed food that fuels that fuel gauge that pushes that fuel gauge towards glucose metabolism away from fat metabolism. So as you reduce processed foods, you're slowly over time going to return your body's ability to ping pong back and forth between using fat and using carbs. Prioritize protein and healthy fats. Most people in the United States are not getting adequate protein, and they're certainly not getting healthy fats. We're getting a lot of the trans fats and kind of highly saturated fats, but remember, we want monounsaturated, polyunsaturated fats to use. Strategic exercising, so high intensity interval training, which may or may not be something that some of us can do. Resistance training, as you guys all know, I'm a huge fan of. And that doesn't mean that you have to squat 1,000 pounds. That's even just body weight exercises or anything that's going to increase your muscle mass, your muscle tone. And then endurance training. Again, you don't have to run 26 miles for this, but just walking for 45 minutes to an hour is what we would kind of call endurance training here a day to flip your body into that fat use mode. Cold therapy, as we talked about, heat exposure can boost metabolic optimization and adaptation as well. And you see here, consider managing sleep, resistance train. Reverse dieting actually means adding calories in, taking these diet breaks, because if you're in too long of a calorie deprivation mode, then your body thinks that you're never going to get food and it holds on to calories avidly. That's why in the program, the release phase is only 6 weeks long. And anybody who's ever done program, oh, can I just go 2 more weeks and lose no more weight? Well, no, we need a little plateau in there to allow your body to renormalize so that it doesn't start having these long-term adaptations of I'm in a low calorie environment. I have to now hold on avidly to every calorie I can. That actually works against us sometimes and can actually cause you to deposit fat a little bit more as you may get some hormonal changes with your energy balance. Role of exercise. So strength training builds insulin sensitive muscle tissue. You guys know I love lifting weights. That's just for me a meditation. That's just, I call it my bar therapy, the barbell. But muscle actually has something called an independent or insulin independent glucose uptake. So regardless of what your insulin is, you've got the on the muscle just to fire, it needs to use a lot of fuel. So if you are building a lot of muscle, and you don't have to be big and bulky, right? I'm not saying that you have to look like, like a bodybuilder, but if you have pound for pound, ounce for ounce, more lean muscle than fat, your body is just going to use glucose better. And that promotes insulin sensitivity, but also metabolic flexibility because now you don't have as much circulating glucose. High intensity interval training improves glucose metabolism and fat oxidation. This, as we get older, becomes a little bit more difficult because you have to balance the type of exercise that you're doing against what your body can do. And so are things like, where you're going full on, you're sprinting for 30 seconds and then you're stopping for 90 seconds, sprinting, stopping. They call these hill repeats on a treadmill or in cycling. If you can do it, great, because it really does boost your metabolism. If not, there's other things that you can do. Also, low intensity steady state cardio maximizes fat utilization. So we've talked about that before, something we call zone 2 training, where your heart rate is just mildly elevated. So, for instance, if you are in your 70s, let's just say, you want to have that heart rate in the 120 to 130 zone. And it depends on individual and your medications and all that stuff. That's just a guideline. But you don't have to be kind of sprinting full on, full force to flip your body into fat burn mode. Zone 2 training works. And you can always just Google zone 2 training heart rate calculator and put your age in, and it'll do that. Sal, we'll get to questions afterwards. But I duly noted that Sal's got a question about that. And then fasted workouts may train the body efficiently to use stored fat. So what does that mean? So when you're in your fasting window, right, you haven't eaten, if you exercise, right, that obligates your body to fuel, and so you can flip over to the fuel, this fat is fuel metabolism, and boost your fat loss. Now, interestingly, there have been studies done looking at the amount of weight loss during fasted cardio versus non-fasted cardio. The few studies I found showed no significant difference in weight loss. I'm not really sure why. They did not measure body composition change, so my suspicion is there may have been an exchange of muscle for fat, right? That may be one thing, but one other aspect of this that is a little bit less controversial is that if you're doing fasted workouts, you're going to increase your metabolic flexibility because you can't exercise without fat as fuel, right? So I remember I used to do these master swim workouts where I'd be in the pool at 4:45 a.m. And then I'd swim for an hour, hour and a half. This is back when I was crazy doing my triathlon training and things. And I remember initially when I did it, I would hit a wall because around like 400 meters, 500 meters in the pool or something, because I wasn't metabolically flexible. I had to take a sports supplement, but then over time I learned or I realized that, I don't really need to rely on that anymore because that was a prime example of me kind of now becoming metabolically flexible. So very interesting when you actually see it happen. You can actually feel it happen. Another time I saw it for me, I did this crazy kind of military trek around San Francisco where I had to wear a 30-pound backpack and it was like almost like a scavenger hunt around the city of San Francisco. So I smelled everything there's to smell in SF. And my friend and I had been intermittent fasting for about 6 months prior to that, so really kind of optimized this AMK switch. My friends were like downing power bars and they had to stop for food and all that stuff. And I felt fine. I didn't eat the entire time and I just drank water, kept my body hydrated. And again, it was that metabolic flexibility. So it's really interesting to see when your body does that. And you guys, by virtue of having done well 12, probably already have some degree of that. Now, I would not suggest strapping 30 pounds on your back and walking around San Francisco, but like you may feel a little bit different. It might be a little bit easier for you to get around. Poor sleep. So, what are the three pillars of well 12? Diet, stress, sleep, right? Those are things that we optimize. So poor sleep screws up your metabolic health, right? So poor sleep affects mitochondria. It disrupts your insulin sensitivity. Elevated cortisol, that stress hormone, increases cravings and fat storage. And so you can see here that when you're kind of having difficulty sleeping, short sleep duration, something called circadian misalignment, where you're not sleeping in line with the earth. These all lead to things like activation of your sympathetic, that fight or flight system, increases in cortisol, oxidative stress, which we've talked about several times, activation of inflammatory pathway, change in what are called adipokines, or the hormones of fat metabolism. That all leads to insulin resistance, pancreatic beta cell dysfunction. What is poor sleep? Sal's asking. So we want to aim for 7.5 hours of sleep. That has been what's been shown in a randomized controlled trial, and actually several trials, that 7.5 seems to be that sweet spot of sleep. Like eight, more than eight is too much, less than seven is not enough. I mean, I will tell you, as tortured as my sleep is, if I'm sleeping 6 hours a night, that's a great night for me. So there are individual differences in this, but that's been what's been shown in trials to be the optimal health. Now, I think we also should have a special mention call out for sleep apnea syndromes, because if you have fragmented sleep or when you're having these obstructive events where your body's not getting oxygen, that leads to a lot of oxidative stress and all these different things. So we really, I think sleep is so essential. And if there is sleep disordered breathing, it is so essential to getting that addressed because sleep apnea has been associated with like metabolic syndrome, certainly from this slide, but all sorts of cardiac things, high blood pressure, elevated cholesterol, blockage in your arteries, all the things, it can be associated with. We want to try and get all that sleep at once. So, it's better to sleep like 7.5 hours straight than hour on, hour off, hour on, hour off, like, breaking up through the day. Because remember, the sleep is not just about, you know, well, it's about rest, but there's also your body's time to heal itself, to get rid of the waste products, all that stuff, particularly in the brain. So you want to try and get that as continuous sleep. Now, again, that's not always feasible for everybody. So you want to optimize kind of or get the longest sleep that you can, but it may be different for different people, right? So that's a thought. And then chronic stress, high cortisol reduces that AMPK activation and AMPK, that switch between fat and glucose metabolism. So stress affects that. Chronic stress increases cravings for sugar and processed foods, leads to fat storage rather than burning fat. So you flip your mode into that calorie avid state. Again, that's why in the drops that we use for Well 12, they have what are called adaptogens in there, so herbals to prevent your body's stress response because we don't want your body to feel, oh my gosh, I'm in this deprivation mode. Meditation. Breath work. Why does Sanjay have breath work in here? Well, breath work actually and relaxation techniques support metabolic balance, right? So that's why it's such a big part of this, decreasing stress and optimizing your health, optimizing your brain, all those things. So it makes a difference. And this is again not to beat you over the head, but if you do have these repeated psychosocial stressors, it affects what's called your HPA, hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, leading to increases in cortisol that drives that fight or flight system, that sympathetic nervous system. So like over here now, your fat cells will get larger. You get a lot more of these circulating free fatty acids. You get pro-inflammatory cells. Um, you know, through other pathways. Oh, on this side here, you get inflammation, insulin resistant adipose tissue, which is fat tissue. So a lot of things that we don't want to have happen. Metabolic flexibility. One of the supplements that I love. So we always, 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 we want to do this naturally, right? Always, let me stress that again. Always, 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 we want to try natural first. But, if we do need meds or supplements, there are some that help. Berberine is one that I absolutely love. It's derived from a citrus plant. And berberine activates AMPK, and it actually mimics the effect of exercise and fasting. So it pushes your body into using fat as fuel, enhances insulin sensitivity, promotes fat oxidation, and reduces inflammation, supporting mitochondrial health and metabolic efficiency. So I don't know if I've ever recommended berberine to either of you guys, but it's a supplement that I actually love. I take it on a regular basis. It is thought that berberine has a similar effect to a drug called metformin, if you've ever heard of metformin before. So it's just the more natural version of that. And I just kind of came across something a little bit sinister is they actually, berberine mimics a lot of what these GLP-1 drugs. So in Ireland, they've actually banned berberine. They've made it like a controlled substance in favor of, I guess, with the anticipation that these GLP-1 drugs may take over. So they don't want you to have the ability to get that naturally, which just seems so uncool to me. But that's what's happening. So I don't make the news, I just report it. So berberine, powerhouse of cells. So takeaway points from today's talk, sustained metabolic health. How do you do it? Well, gradually extend these fasting windows, reduce sugar and processed food, incorporate strength and endurance training. And again, low level endurance training, optimize sleep, and adjust based on individual metabolic processes. So that's everything I have to talk about today.